We are so back. The One Piece manga officially returns with chapter 1087, and if you haven't read it yet, there's a link in the description, so check that out before watching the rest of this. We've been waiting weeks for this, so let's just get right into it. We start the chapter out at a ship graveyard near Naval Base G1. Now, if you don't remember, G1 was first mentioned in the first chapter after the time skip, back in 598, and it's a marine base near the Red Line on the New World side. Sakazuki became Fleet Admiral and swapped Marineford with G1, choosing to be closer to where the four emperors reigned. So New Marineford is where G1 used to be, and G1 is now where Marineford was pre-time skip. And there's an interesting connection here with the context of Sword. See, Sword is a bunch of Marine soldiers who partially resign so they can act against the emperors without any repercussions from the Marines or the world government. And there's been a long-time theory that Sakazuki actually oversees Sword, or he's affiliated with them in some way, due to the sword tattoo that he was shown to have during an old cover page. And we've seen in the past that Sengoku, who was the former Fleet Admiral, had an operation similar to Sword going on with Rosinante. So this decision to move Marineford closer to where the emperors reside would allow for Sword to operate more freely without crossing the Red Line. So there's some interesting stuff here potentially. We get the return of Brannew, explaining to Fullbody and Jango that Garp and Aokiji used to train here, using battleships as punching bags. Last we saw Brannew was when he was explaining the rock situation and giving us the bounties for various pirates of status, and briefly during a flashback during the recognition of Cross Guild as a threat. Fullbody and Jango were last seen at New Marineford after their successful escort of the Alabasta Royal Party with Hina for the Reverie. We've seen Garp can be particularly reckless, and I guess this just kinda adds to Suru's comment from Chapter 0 of not wanting Garp on her battleship out of fear of him destroying it. And this chapter seems to reveal the great debt that Kuzan had for Garp that he first mentioned all the way back in Long Ring Longland, as Garp personally trained Kuzan himself. Now, it's interesting to note that Brannew still considers Kuzan a hero, despite Kuzan defecting and working with Blackbeard. Could this be a hint at the theory that Kuzan is still secretly being a Marine or operating as a Marine in some form? Once again, the idea of what a hero is brought up in this chapter. Garp, Aokiji, and Kobe have all been called heroes, whereas Luffy explicitly rejects this title, seeing it as it requires him to share his meat with others. Sanwan Wolf is knocked out into the ocean by Garp, and it's not easy saving a drowning giant. We've seen him stand up in water before, but maybe that's due to his amplified size using his devil fruit. He may just need to wake up on his own, or perhaps Avalo Pizarro or Kuzan can pick him up with their powers. We also get a bit more from Vasco Shot's Glug Glug fruit, which seems to let him spit back out the alcohol he drinks and ignite it with a match. Nothing crazy going on. Kabaji was breathing fire all the way back in Orangetown, and we'll have to see what else this fruit can do. Garp has no trouble defending himself from this fire, though, using down pirates to block it, and he even makes a new move out of it, pirate fireballs. This is very reminiscent of Luffy in Arlong Park, where he effectively does the same exact thing, using downed Arlong pirates to block the oncoming attack, and then getting an idea for a new move. The combat intelligence runs in the family. We also get the Isle Isle fruit here, depicted this time as giving the skull formation actual pupils, whereas last time we saw that there weren't any. Perhaps this is more advanced application of the fruit, allowing Pizarro to form eyes to see what's going on around the island, since last time the giant skull seemed to be going off a feel. We get some more of Oda's classic clothes with words that describe the current situation. This guy here seems to be rocking a shirt that says "come fight" or "can't fight" or something like that. Meanwhile, we see Garp's ship is back on the sea. It had crashed into the center of the town last time we saw it, and Kujaku calls into Garp informing him that they've saved everyone from the island, and we see Pizarro notices this. We'll come back to this later. Some of the captives are shown here, such as the Snake Neck tribe member that we saw last time. Tashigi and the rest of the Marines are trying to thaw out Hibari, who was frozen by Kuzan, though they seem to be using blankets as opposed to the water method that Chopper suggested initially. Off to the corner, though, we might have our first appearance of Bogard in the manga proper since Water 7. Very excited to see him back, if he is back at all. Back in the center of town, Prince Groose is here seen using his Glorp Glorp fruit powers to make a clay mace or Morning Star, and then later on a clay spear. He asks Garp if he's also included in the future of the Navy, as he was jealous of Kobe back in 1081. The Blackbeard pirates use the oldest trick in the book to play on Kobe's good-hearted nature. We've seen this done a couple times throughout the series, most recently during Oden's flashback with Higurashi and Kaido's pirates, and even back in the day with Zoro and Baroque Works, although he never fell for it. Shiryu goes to kill Kobe with his clear fruit, masking his presence, but Garp saves him and takes the hit himself. Kobe thinks Garp did it for him, but Garp dispels that notion, echoing back to when Kobe was ashamed of thinking anyone would come save him. We learn Garp's Cross Guild enforced bounty, 3 crowns, equaling about 3 billion berries. Fun note, that's equal to Luffy's current bounty. I wonder what the fine print on the poster says though, maybe some loophole so Buggy doesn't actually have to pay out the 3 billion. And interesting of note, we now know how much a crown is. Back when we first saw the cross-scaled bounty system, it wasn't very clear, but from 1080 and this chapter, we know that a star is about 100 million and a crown is about 1 billion. This is going to send the power scalers on a frenzy, because it's stated that admirals are worth 3 billion, which fuels some nonsense discussions of Law and Luffy being admiral level, or admirals being emperor level, or whatever that means. I'll leave it to the power scalers. I do want to point out that we did see a Marine who was worth 1 billion back during the Cross Guild's first introduction, and I'm unsure who this is or what their name is. It's not really familiar, but maybe we'll see this person down the line. Also, it's been pointed out in the past that the bounty system used by Cross Guild bears some resemblance to the one used by Doflamingo during Dressrosa. And so, we get a brief Kuzan and Garp flashback. Couple interesting bits to bring up here. We know from Vivre cards and the canonical parts of Film Z's supplementary material that Aokiji joined the Marines at age 19. That was 30 years ago from present day. This line about Kuzan having already learned from Navy instructors is a fun nod to what we saw in Film Z or Film Z, where Zephyr was the former Marine instructor that Kuzan learned from. Also a bit of irony, as Garp's current role is that of a Marine instructor. Garp seems to have taken Kuzan under his wing for a great period of time, but let me try my best to piece this timeline together. Garp's appearance here resembles what he looked like when he initially joined the Marines at age 22, 56 years ago, though it's still pretty close to how he looked 38 years ago at God Valley. Kuzan joined the Marines 30 years ago and likely excelled through his training with his Marine instructors, similarly to how Kobe and Helmeppo were able to advance from where they were in the East Blue all the way to where they were in Water 7 in a very short amount of time. But 30 years ago was also when Chinjiao and Garp fought, and during that fight we see him with his mustache and beard fully grown out. So assuming Garp's appearance here isn't a mistake, to reconcile this, Garp had to have taken Kuzan as his apprentice 30 years ago. Then there's this line about Garp's son becoming a revolutionary. If this is referring to Dragon forming the Revolutionary Army and not when he initially became a freedom fighter, then we know this was 22 years ago, since Dragon formed the Revolutionary Army within a year of seeing the atrocity that was the Ohara incident. That also tells us that Kuzan was still training with Garp while Kuzan was a vice admiral, since Kuzan was one of the vice admirals involved in the Buster Call of Ohara. Finally, we get Garp telling Kuzan his grandson wants to be a pirate, which we saw during the Ace Sabo Luffy flashback that took place 12 years ago, and it seems that it was at this point that Kuzan had become an admiral, Admiral Aokiji. Kuzan and Garp clash, and it of course reminds us of Luffy and Aokiji, or Garp and Luffy, though it seems very clear by now that Garp was holding back during Marineford. The two trade blows and get blown back. This chapter does a lot to insinuate that Garp and Kuzan are on the same level now after all these years, what with the idea of Garp having the same bounty as admirals and Garp having trained Kuzan over the years. Though it should be noted, Kuzan uses a technique called Ice Glove to bolster his offensive capabilities, while Garp uses good old-fashioned hockey. The line about Garp raising a formidable foe is also interesting, with the context of the flashback we just got. Garp has a habit of raising people who would go on to be an enemy of the government and the Marines. We've got Kuzan, Dragon, Luffy, and to an extent Kobe, with him getting in Akainu's way during Marineford, but of course not as explicitly as the first three. I wonder if there's some chance that Garp's overt pressuring of people he cares about to become great Marines is an intentional move to push them towards going against the Marines and the government. Something he himself cannot do for whatever reason. He despises celestial dragons and pirates, but worked with Roger to protect the celestial dragons' interests during God Valley, and often finds Luffy making trouble for the Marines and the government to be hilarious. And there's also that weird line from Stelly suggesting Garp may have connections to celestial dragons. Is there some weird possibility where Garp has an affiliation to the celestial dragons that he is shameful of, and that prevents him from acting against them explicitly, which is why he trains people who will go against the Marines and the world government to carry out their own justice? There's some interesting stuff here at play. Potentially. We cut back to the ocean where Pizarro is making use of his Isle fruit powers to take out the civilians and the Marines on Garp's ship. Habari seems to have thawed out by now and is fine, but there's a couple cool things here. 1. Pizarro's Isle fruit allows him to spawn hands and feet, though we're unsure if he can actually move and walk about like a humanoid being. The giant arm is very reminiscent of Pika's Stone fruit, and it wouldn't surprise me if the Isle fruit is just a stronger version of that fruit, as we've seen Pizarro be able to recreate himself in a larger form made out of the island as well. It's also interesting that the island seems to be mirroring Pizarro's actions here, instead of it just being controlled by him mentally, though Pizarro's form here is also made of the island, so I'm unsure how this exactly works. Perhaps he's operating both the island and the stone form simultaneously. Pizarro exclaims he's tired of Blackbeard getting all the credit in the newspapers, a sentiment that he's expressed before, with him suggesting that he should be the captain back when he first formed the crew, and he goes on to predict tomorrow's newspaper by giving us a 45-word headline. I get why he's never in the news. Morgans would never print that. Moving on. Kobe exclaims that there are civilians on board, but Garp remains cool and calm, harkening back to Doflamingo's famous monologue with, "Justice will prevail." Now, if you recall, Kuzan was very upset with Sakazuki for sinking a civilian ship during the Ohara incident, and chose to enact his own justice by freezing Saul with his ice time capsule. I wonder if we're going to get a repeat of this in some shape or form, with Kuzan not wanting to allow the same mistake to happen again, preventing Pizarro from destroying the ship, and then maybe even freezing Garp, effectively saving him. As we know, the ice time capsule preserves the target, as Saul was recently revealed to have survived. Could this be where Oda's heading with this? After all, the Egghead incident is seeming to parallel the Ohara incident, with the next level buster call on the way, and Void Sentry research being at the core of the issue. Also, real quick, where are Perona and Gecko Moria? Last we saw, Kobe had promised to save Moria after Perona helped Kobe escape from his cell. In this chapter, they said all the captives were on board. So are they supposed to be on that ship? Could they end up helping out and protecting them from Pizarro's attack? Or maybe Tashigi and Bogard get a cool moment and slice up the arm like Zoro did Pika. When we pan out to the sea, in this chapter, we don't see Thriller Bark anywhere in the ports, and we know Moria brought it with him when he arrived on Fullbody initially. Of course, it could just be behind the island on the other side, but I'd like to leave the breakdown with one cool idea. The Thriller Bark is an island that has been built into a ship, effectively a floating island. If the Blackbeard pirates confiscated it, then Pizarro could use it with his Isle fruit to become a mobile island. One last thing, a cool theory that could come into play, a floating island was what Iceberg wanted to convert Water 7 into. Well, that's what Thriller Bark effectively is. But, Iceberg, wait a minute. Icebergs are sort of floating islands, and they float because ice is less dense than water. So you could in theory fix your island atop a large enough mass of ice in order to have it float. Maybe there's something here with Kuzan's ice powers and Pizarro's Isle powers. Some sort of future synergy for making Fullbody completely mobile. Anyways, that's about it for this breakdown. I hope you enjoyed it. It was incredibly fun going through this chapter, panel by panel. It felt like a quick one, but the more I dug into it, the more thematic beats I found. And this might somehow be one of my favorite One Piece chapters in a while. It's just dripping with connections and callbacks, and there's no break next week, so can't wait for that one. As always, thank you for watching, and I really do appreciate all the support over the past month or so. We're a little over 60 subscribers now, and the live action trailer breakdown is about to hit 4,000 views. Again, this is crazy for me. Thank you guys so much for your support, and I'm so glad the manga is back and I can do breakdowns for it as well. And we may even get another live action trailer in a week or so. One Piece Day is coming up. So until then, thank you, and I hope to see you in the next one.